It's now only 9 days before Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are sworn in as President and Vice President of the United States. But that event on January 20 is still being affected by the uncertainty created by last week's desecration of the Capitol, the seat of the country's legislative power, by hundreds of mostly far-right supporters of President Donald Trump, who up till the moment continues to talk about a stolen election, in spite of his public avowal to work for a peaceful transition of power. The sheer gravity of the mayhem visited on that monument and the attendant loss of lives has now led to a bipartisan clamor for impeachment proceedings to be launched against President Trump for his divisive rhetoric, which is being blamed for the invasion. Joining us now from Arise Abuja studio to look at all of that is Karl Bostic, Arise News Channel political analyst. Welcome to the program, Karl. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us quickly.
Good morning.
Is it logistically possible to still impeach President Trump just 9 days to the inauguration of a new presidency?
That's right. It is quite an obstacle with only 9 days to go until the inauguration of Joe Biden. But already wheels are in motion, and as some people have put it, the train has already left the station. There's just simply no way to stop the train. It's just a matter of how fast it goes. What it looks like right now is that we do know that Nancy Pelosi, who's the Speaker of the House, she did send out a letter to members of the Democratic caucus in the House. That's more than 200 members, stating her intentions. And right now they have a two-pronged or two-front attack. What they've done is they've given Vice President Pence a 24-hour ultimatum, which ends later today, in which he has to declare whether or not he plans or intends to invoke the 25th Amendment. That's the amendment that would allow the Vice President, together with a majority of the cabinet, to declare that the President's unfit, unable to carry out his duties. Right now, that's very unlikely because Pence has privately said that he's not going to go in that direction. Alternatively, on a second front, Pelosi has said that if this is not invoked, then they'll proceed with impeachment resolution. Very simply, that vote could happen by midweek, as early as Wednesday. So we could be looking at an impeachment of Donald Trump by middle of the week, as early as Wednesday. But then, it's a two-part process because that's merely an indictment. The next question is, when does it go to the Senate? And as you said, next week, Joe Biden becomes sworn in as the next president. The last thing he wants to do is to have this as a cloud hanging over him as he begins his presidency, the 46th presidency. So, in fact, some are suggesting that before these articles are submitted to the Senate, they may actually give Joe Biden some breathing room, some space to set out his 100-day agenda. Right now, Joe Biden's main priority is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, dealing with the virus, dealing with the vaccines, and dealing with getting out stimulus payments to people in America who need it.
And Karl, more senior Republicans are denouncing the president's behavior. But this is obviously a Democratic-led effort to impeach the president. Is it likely to divide the country even further?
Well, yes, there are those who say that it's time to move on, and this would divide it further, as you rightly say. But that's only just a viewpoint. I think there's just so much uncertainty because this is just so unprecedented. Never has there been an occasion in the nation's history where you're impeaching a president for a second time. Never has there been an occasion where you're impeaching a president again for a second time, days before he's out of office.
Right,
and never before has this happened, just only days after members were
Carl,
attacked.
if you can hear me.
So some people are saying, yes, it's time to move on, but they say he should be held accountable.
All right, Karl, if you can hear me, we'll go for a quick breather. We'll come back. We'll talk to you soon. All right, pleasure to have you back. We're talking to Karl Bostic, Arise Channel news correspondent, and we're talking about the antecedents of what happened in America recently. Karl, you were trying to make a point before we went on that quick commercial break. Hi, Karl. Hello, Karl.
Hi, good morning again.
Great. Yeah, just continue with your point. Yeah.
Yeah, I was simply saying that it's a matter of just accountability, holding the president accountable. You just can't, some would argue that you just can't move on and and give it a sense that he's gotten away with it, and to suggest that if by moving on with by prosecuting further would further divide the country. If anything, that will embolden perhaps his movement or cause or so-called base. I mean, already the D.C. mayor is warning of pending threats in the coming days leading up to the inauguration. There's talk about a million militia march, which is basically a slogan for yet another protest geared up to coincide with January 20th, where once again extremists and Trump supporters could once again descend on Washington on January 20th. They're talking about enhanced security around the Capitol, this time only, beginning on Monday. It'll be completely sealed off as of Monday. So the threat is there, and it's about accountability, but also one purpose of the impeachment. In setting the wheels in motion, and I said that the train's left the station, they want to set in motion a process by which, at the end of the day, President Trump is disqualified from ever again holding public office, disqualified from holding at least federal office, that is. So I think that's one of the intents right there for all of this uncertainty. They want to make sure that he can never hold public office again. At the same time, though, this doesn't really address the root causes of what's going on in America. I personally think that when I hear these, people reacting or lawmakers saying that this is not America, well, the sad reality is it is America. America is divided. It's polarized. It may not even be two Americas. It may not even be a blue America that's Democrat or a red America that's Republican. It's also an America that's a Trump America. It's a Trump America with 74 million that voted for him. And you need to kind of, wrestle and deal with that. And that's why I think Joe Biden is focusing, rightly so, on the coronavirus topics, because the real issues that concern Americans right now are health issues. I mean, it's still spiraling out of control. People need paychecks. People are jobless, not paying their rents, not paying their mortgages. Small businesses are going out of business. We're looking at a double dip recession. So I think by tackling those problems first head on, that's doing more to heal the country than worrying about whether or not he's impeached or convicted. And if he is impeached or convicted, which is an important deterrent for him, at the same time, that should be left up to the hands of Congress, to the House and to the Senate. And that's exactly what Joe Biden is saying. And also to the question about whether or not this is only a partisan effort. What's happened is with this House resolution, for example, for impeachment, actually some of the authors were Republican members of the House, but they didn't want to have their names added to it. And Republican members of the House are privately saying they will support impeachment. And we are hearing Republican senators already saying that he has to leave. I mean, the best case scenario for everyone is if he just simply left or resigned, which was said yesterday by Republican Senator Pat Toomey. So again, as I said, there's a lot of uncertainty out here because it's also unprecedented. But once again, just to put things in historical perspective, two quick points. This is the first time that the Capitol has been assaulted, has been attacked, or Washington has been attacked in this way, occupied, since the War of 1812. That's more than 2 centuries ago. And at the same time, you look at the Civil War, which tore the country apart for 3 to 4 years. The Civil War, which happened in the middle of the 19th century, but between the North and the South. The Confederate Army never even reached Washington. They got as far as the Potomac River. They never even got to the Capitol as a result. And here you have just a week ago, or less than a week ago, thousands of people descending on the Capitol, vandalizing, and the police, if not complicit, standing passively by and enabling them as they rampaged and vandalized through the Capitol. So this cannot just be allowed to go on without any accountability and simply say, let's move on, even though the Capitol was ransacked and people's lives were put in danger.
Okay, Karl, great point. Like you make the point that this is America. You just made me remind that very popular song by Childish Gambino, that this is America, and he talked about those things that were polarizing America at that point in time. But I got 2 quick questions for you. The Lincoln Project recently tweeted, it says, you could make a Supreme Court judge in 8 days. Why can't you impeach a president in 10 days? What's your read on that? And secondly, do you think that what is happening currently between Mike Pence and Trump might lead Mike Pence to just change his mind and call the cabinet and say they're not interested in the president again? There's a report that leaked yesterday that said, since all of this happened that endangered the life of Vice President Mike Pence, President Trump has not even called Mike Pence to check on him and see how it's doing since that event in the Capitol where Mike Pence had to scamper for his life. And Mike Pence is angry about it.
That's right. And that's a very interesting point, a very good point. But it is complicated. Yes, Vice President Pence is perhaps very, very angry at President Trump. Just to add to what you've mentioned, as of yesterday, it was reported that the two have yet to even speak to each other since Wednesday morning. They haven't even talked to each other. That's how angry Pence is. But that doesn't overlap, or that's maybe separated from invoking the 25th Amendment. And it's complicated by the fact the cabinet's made up of 15 members, 3 of whom are acting only, so they may not even have a, shall we say, a right to vote. But it's complicated by the fact that you already have 2 cabinet members resigning, the Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao, and the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos. And Betsy DeVos herself said, well, the reason why she resigned because once she was convinced, or once she was understood that the option of invoking the 25th Amendment was off the table, that's why she resigned. So where it stands right now, you know, privately Pence has said that he's not going to invoke it, and now Nancy Pelosi's given a 24-hour ultimatum. So we'll see what he says, but right now it looks like he's not going to invoke it. And getting very briefly to the point about if they can fast-track the Supreme Court justice in, in
8 days?
In a record amount of time, why can't they do it with Donald Trump? Well, they can impeach him. They can impeach him on Wednesday. That's what can happen. The problem is the conviction. And the Senate won't go back into session until January 19th, the day before Biden's inauguration. So impeachment can happen. It's just the conviction part that would take some time.
Well, can't the conviction process continue even after President Biden will have taken over office? That's the first point. The second point is the fact that wouldn't a censure be an option instead of going the whole way to impeach President Trump? Will a censure from Congress achieve the same effect as an impeachment, or it will have no effect whatsoever?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. You know, censure is definitely an option. You know, censure is an option amongst, all those tools in the kit, the tools ranging from censure, impeaching, to convicting, to him simply walking away and resigning, the latter, which seems very, very unlikely unless Republicans actually visit him and tell him that you don't have the votes to stay in office, which is what happened with Richard Nixon back during the days of Watergate more than almost 50 years ago. But getting back to the idea of a censure, you're right. A censure you would probably get more bipartisan support for, but then it would only be that. It would only be just, it would not have any teeth at all, so to speak, and almost like a slap on the wrist. So a censure is not talking about impeachment's the front runner. He will be impeached this week. He'll be the he'll be the first president to be impeached twice. But then where it goes from there, no one knows. And one suggestion being floated is that Joe Biden needs to hit the ground running with his agenda and doesn't need to be distracted by this sort of thing overhanging his administration, which is why, there may be delay in sending, the House vote to the Senate until after the first 100 days. I mean, for the first impeachment, after the House impeached Donald Trump, they didn't send it to the Senate the same day. They actually waited a week or so. In this case, it may be months. Whether that changes anything is hard to say. I think 2 things do matter, though. Even after Trump leaves office, the threat is out there, number 1. And number 2, there's a concern about making sure that Trump isn't able to hold public office again, and in fact, maybe even begins to lose his relevance in the political world.
Well, Karl, the mayor of D.C. yesterday released a statement asking the acting Secretary of Homeland Security to rescind all protest permits for the next 10 days. The threats to violence, how serious are this, and are they valid concerns? President Trump also has lost his megaphone, which is Twitter, his social megaphone where he likes, to get all the attention. Does this in any way reduce the threat to violence we're likely to see in the coming days?
Well, I mean, already you've got these online chat rooms, and one online chat room's been detected where 400 people are talking about plans for the inauguration, this so-called Militia March. So there are efforts underway to plan for renewed protests on January 20th. And you speak about the D.C. mayor reaching out to the Department of Homeland Security. They've enhanced security around the Capitol, which is what they should have done the first time last week. As of Monday of next week, 2 days ahead of the inauguration, the Capitol will effectively be a no-go zone. But, apart from just the security alone, let's not forget that this is a time of pandemic. It's just simply not safe to even go back to the Capitol right now. And lawmakers are having to fly back to Washington to return to the Capitol to close quarters and once again expose themselves to the possibility of the coronavirus. And again, looking at those scenes that we saw in the Capitol last week, most, if not all, of the members of the mob or people of the mob, they were maskless. That was a super spreader event. So it's a very dangerous time. And in terms of the threat going on, the threat persists.
Please, if you could just hold your thoughts, Karl.
Even this coming weekend, as early as this weekend.
Karl, sorry to interrupt you. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News Channel. Still with us is Karl Bostic, Arise News Channel political analyst who has been looking at developments in the United States. Karl, thank you for staying with us. If you may just continue.
Actually, yeah, I wanted to return to the point that she was making. I thought it was very interesting because in terms of threats to Washington, it's not only just about the threats and the security risks, which of course are first and foremost the priority of having, beefed up security. In other words, you had stadium-sized crowds of thousands of people descending on the Capitol, and you actually had a Capitol Police force of 1,500, not even dressed in riot gear. The point I want to make is this. It's not only about enhanced security, but it's also how the security confronts these so-called protesters or potential members of a mob. And what I'm referring to is the way in which this basically exclusively white mob was basically handled with kid gloves, gently. Doors open for them, scenes of a woman member of the mob being helped down the staircase, police taking selfies, almost begging the question, whose side are they on? Whose side are they on? And the reason why this was raised because it just jars with those images of the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer, especially in the wake of George Floyd's death. Just to put things in graphic pictures, after they were evicted from the Capitol, only about 52 people were arrested out of the thousands that had descended, 52 people. But in the days after George Floyd, a day or two after George Floyd, when those protests emanated, you had people in riot gear, tactical gear, and more than 400 people arrested. When you have those Black Lives Matter protests, they were confronted by National Guard troops in riot gear. They were confronted with rubber. When Trump marched through Lafayette Square to the church with that photo up with the Bible, they were tear gassed. Rubber bullets were used. Helicopters were flying above. And here you've got, police on bicycles. The perimeter's low enough to leap over, and doors being opened for them. So it's not only about the size of security, but it's also how the security treats them, and whether there is a double standard or not, and whether they will be confronted forcibly. Donald Trump saying, if anyone comes to the White House, we've got dogs, German Shepherds waiting to meet them. Well, where were those German Shepherds on Wednesday? Not to say they should have been used, but to say that there's obviously, as far as Black Americans are concerned, there's a real double standard there when it comes to protests.
All right. One word just to sum up everything you said, and Karl, let's say the truth. It is racism. And racism was evident even in the way the white protests were treated compared to Black Lives Matter protests. But I've just got two quick tweets as regards this. A lot of watchers are saying that if they go ahead to impeach Trump now, it's going to affect them in the midterm elections. Because let's not forget the elections are just 2 years away, midterm elections. What's your read on that? And also there's a COVID-19 twist to all of this. We're in the middle of the pandemic, as we repeatedly said. They said some of the lawmakers that were docking had contact with somebody with COVID-19, and they're beginning to come down with COVID-19. What's your take on these two areas?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Not only is the Capitol not a secure area yet, but it may not even be COVID-19 free. I mean, you had that situation, as you just mentioned a moment ago, where lawmakers were in close confined quarters when they were evacuated, where they were being exposed to someone who had the virus. So there's that uncertainty hovering over it, and that's a real concern there. Regarding the midterm elections, that's a very, very tough one to answer because Joe Biden is already, kind of, shall we say, in another race for another election. That being the fact that while he does have, a very slight, control in the Senate with Democrats, his control of the House and the Senate could be jeopardized, could be in peril once again if the Republicans mount an assault. But to his benefit, to the Democrats' benefit, the Republican Party is badly divided, is badly fractured. They're not even united in their response about how to react or respond to last week's events. They just held their annual conference over the weekend where they re-elected the head of the RNC, who's a staunch Trump ally. There was not even a mention about Trump's role for the violence and deaths that ensued. They simply, lamented the tragic loss of life, without even connecting it to the rhetoric that incited that insult. So you really have a party that's at a crossroads about whether or not Donald Trump still remains a player with the Republican Party or is no longer plays, lost its relevance. But to put things in perspective, in the course of one term, what has Donald Trump done for the Republican Party? He's lost the House, he's lost the Senate, he's lost the executive branch, the White House. So he's lost all three branches of government. So how can they really hitch their wagon to him moving forward to the midterm elections? The problem is you've got the 74 million people who voted for him. That's why I said that you may have three Americas, red America, blue America, which is Democrats, and then the Trump America. How really big and active and volatile is that? And we just simply don't know. But then again, I go back to the point that if Joe Biden can deliver on the management of the coronavirus in terms of handling the virus, with a national strategy such as, encouraging face masks, getting the vaccines out, people will see those results. They'll see the stimulus checks. They want to get back to work. They want their businesses reopened. If they see those results, those are the bread and butter kitchen table issues that I think that will give them some momentum. And more importantly, the Democratic Party, unlike the Republican Party, is united. The Republican Party right now is fractured and divided. They don't know whether or not Donald Trump is part of their future or not. And that's the crossroads they're at right now.
Well, Karl, I'd like to ask you, isn't impeachment as proposed a double-edged sword which could work against the Democrats themselves? One, they could inadvertently turn Donald Trump into a political matter because it will turn around. They've stolen my election. Now they are hounding me. They want to impeach me a second time. And they could use that to garner more popularity. That's one. Two, wouldn't it also affect President Biden? A new president having his own priorities bogged down by Donald Trump again, the shadow of Donald Trump all over the place. And the Republicans who are pro-Trump are then doing everything in Parliament to block him.
Well, if I understand what you're saying, because I think I lost some of what you're saying, I think, he's got a lot of, obstacles, because after January 20th, he's not going to have that megaphone of access to the media at will, and he's lost Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and all those social media. And right now they're scrambling to find those platforms to reach to reach their supporters. So I think there are a lot of challenges right there. I don't think Biden's going to be bogged down, but forgive me, I couldn't hear clearly your first question. If you could just.
No, I was asking whether the impeachment as proposed is not a double-edged sword, which could turn out to be counterproductive for the Democrats themselves.
Of course it's a double-edged sword because the country's so divided. And some people want to move on. Some people think there should be accountability. All those things. I mean, this is unprecedented, uncharted territory. There's no real so-called right solution, but some feel also at the same time this was an incitement to violence against the government. As I said, historically, you've never had the Capitol attack that's assaulted before. How can you just move on from that? And how can you just even censure someone? So there has to be accountability there. And how can you let this kind of behavior and conduct perpetuate and continue? And one deterrent is making sure that he's never allowed to hold office again. I mean, it's not a case of really, pick your poison, because there's no real good solution. But I think right now, as I mentioned, the train is out of the station. And I think the idea now is to mitigate the consequences. By mitigating the consequences, I'm suggesting that the Joe Biden administration, they don't want this as the cloud overhanging them when he hits the ground running on day one. They want this to be managed by the House and by the Senate. And this may be the sort of a thing that doesn't reach the Senate, until a month or two into his administration. So it's a sword with two dulled edges, if you want to call it a double-edged sword. Those aren't sharp blades at all. They're just two dull edges. But as far as Donald Trump's concerned, the reason why he's a threat right now is also, the final just a thought, they're not even treating him as a president in the White House. They're just seeing him someone as unhinged, unpredictable, who's unstable, who simply has to be managed. But there's only one president at a time, and he's the one who still has access to the nuclear codes that could start a nuclear war, or that could start even military action against places like Iran, for example. That's why there is such concern about getting him removed from office immediately before he can do any more damage, because yes, he could actually do something very, very impulsive and rash, like give orders and authorizing military action, for example, against Iran. That's still very much on the table. And so how do they manage that? Right now, he's someone who's being managed at the White House, who's not even being president.
Well, thank you very much, Karl Bostic, for joining us this morning on The Morning Show.